切れてしまった。その回線割と不安定だからな。この辺りもどうにかしたいんだけど。
The Combine soldier you see here won't fight you. It's been programmed to run back and forth along the path shown on the ground in order to illustrate the stride retargeting system developed for Half-Life Alyx. One of the challenges of animating digital characters is making sure that their feet don't slide along the ground as they move.
そうね。
Humans are very good at picking out irregularities in the movements of virtual characters, especially in VR, and Combine soldiers in particular need to look like their feet are planting and their weight is shifting as they change direction. Otherwise, they appear weightless and unconvincing. In a pre-processing phase, our stride retargeting system analyzes the steps of each authored animation and stores them as a direction-independent trajectory. At runtime, our system predicts where each foot will land on the next step based on the motion of the animation, the character's path, and the height of the ground. The pairs of colored boxes on the ground illustrate this process. The red boxes show the previous foot positions, the green boxes indicate the soldier's current foot position, and the blue boxes are drawn where each foot is predicted to land next. Once the predicted foot positions are calculated, the system guides the feet to the predicted locations using the trajectory information to preserve the style of the original animation. Once the foot lands, it is locked in place until the next step. In the end, this system was so effective that we could essentially make any animation walk in any direction without foot sliding. You can experiment with the system by moving around the area, since the soldier has been set up to always face you while running the specified path.
にしようかな。近時の集団容器かレーザーサイトか。集団容器にするかとりあえず。
Oh wow, check it out. My gun just keeps getting better and better.
You know, Russ, technically, I don't think there's a whole lot of your gun left anymore.
I'll tell you what, let's put that idea on hold for now. We can chat about my gun when you get back.
グリップの部分にちょこっと残ってるぐらい。オーセル持って何をどうするためのものなんだろうな。時々こうする。これもここでいいのか。こっちは抑えられないやつね。そしてまあ次からはこのサブマシンガンだな。ダブルショットは正直そんな変わんないだろうし。電気で少しだけ減った。よし、ないかな。銃弾はある程度設置場所が決まってる上で電気の充電が少ないとそこに生成されるのかな、多分。
Getting kind of crowded down here, Russ.
Comm channel's gone crazy since we took out that substation. They know we're after the vault now. Whatever's in there, they really, really don't want us to have it.
Well, now I just want it more.
Now that's the spirit.
入ってなかったっけ。ぐらいあってほしかったな。結構弾減ったぞ。出てくれてもいいと思うんだけどな。
Trip mines have appeared in prior Half-Life games, and the act of defusing them seemed like a natural fit for a VR game, where players can perform complex operations with their hands. By this point in the game, players have already learned how to hack Combine technology with their multi-tool, but we wanted defusing a trip mine to be more tense than the hacking puzzles. To defuse a trip mine, not only does the player have to place their hand near the laser that could trigger the mine, but they have to perform the task within just a few seconds. Early versions of this puzzle were inspired by lockpicking, resembling a series of tumblers that the player had to quickly align. Unfortunately, the tumbler design required players to rotate their wrists in an uncomfortable manner, particularly given that they had to also avoid touching the laser beam. We removed the rotational component but kept the timing element, leading to the mechanic you see in the final game. We also experimented with causing the trip mines to actually explode if the player failed to defuse them, but most players found this too punishing, especially in cases where a chain reaction of explosions could occur. Instead, the mines just stay active and the player can attempt to defuse them again. We did end up keeping this behavior for the hard difficulty setting, but added a warning sound a few seconds before the mine actually explodes, to give players some time to move away. We also experimented with allowing defused mines to be removed and redeployed by the player, but we hadn't designed enough combat scenarios around this mechanic for it to be satisfying in practice, so this was left out of the final game.
Ah, なるほどね。前回ないと思ったら、ここで音を鳴らすとそうなるのか。
This combat arena that loops back over itself as the player winds through the tenement buildings was one of the earliest test maps built when we began adding Combine soldiers to Half-Life Alyx. One of the lessons we learned from this series of combat encounters was that fighting Combine soldiers was physically taxing on players, as we needed to pay careful attention to pacing. Taking cover, reloading, switching weapons, and acquiring targets really pushed on all the skills that players had learned up until this point. To help cut down on fatigue, we added gaps between the Combine encounters and removed some of the combat altogether to better pace the experience. The trip mines in the stairwell following this battle are a good example of one of the pacing elements we used to slow the player down and let them recuperate before the combat ramps back up again.
Russ, are they saying my name?
Yeah, that's not good.
アレックス、有名になってしまってまあ。空っぽか。ここには何もない。お、
Steady.特にないか。めちゃめちゃご了承してしまった。体力がないから気をつけねばならない。思ったよりも強いな。もう拳銃ばっか使ってたけど、さすがにコンバイン銃。
It was an interesting challenge for artists and level designers to employ environmental storytelling to paint a picture of what may have happened inside the walls of the quarantine zone. Just like the hotel, these apartments have been overrun by Zen foliage and are filled with people's belongings, abandoned in haste. In this area, the walls have been torn down, either by destructive portal storms or perhaps the Combine's cleanup effort. Barrels of fluid used by workers to try and treat or contain the Zen growth have been left behind, and it would appear that the cleanup efforts have either failed or been abandoned. By not explaining every facet of the world, we leave players with the opportunity to imagine for themselves the bigger picture of life in City 17.
ないかな。お、弾。ないか。星印がある分プラスなのかしら。先進もうか。ここ前回めちゃめちゃご利用していったんだよね。多分ドラゴンに開けてやればいいんだろうけど、ご利用したい。
Oh, your dad's back.
Oh, thank God.
Russell! God damn, it's good to see you. Likewise. Oh, this is great. Honestly, I'd pegged your survival at about 4%.
You can thank that Fortigun. He got me back here in one piece.
Russell, put Dad on.
Alex, baby!
Dad, we just took down a substation.
Good. Because when they move this thing, that weapon's gone. We need to get it tonight.
We will. You still got that data pod, right?
I do. Russ, this thing's bio-coded. I'm gonna need the TLI.
Yep, it's right over there.
Okay, great. You good, honey?
For sure. You go ahead. I'll be fine, Dad. I promise.
Keep that promise. I'll get to work on the data pod.
コーティング、生物で覆われてるみたいな、そんな感じなのか。何もなかった。
Once we had the spine of the game complete, teams went through the maps looking for additional opportunities to add the character and tone that players associate with the Half-Life games. This mannequin head grab was a fun opportunity to hit on the sci-fi horror B-movie vibe. We had a few conversations about how long to leave the head crab atop the mannequin, and decided that the experience should be analogous to catching a small dog in the middle of some mischief. We wanted players to feel like they had walked in on something they weren't supposed to see, and for them to go away feeling like every inch of the game contained something for them to find if they chose to explore it. After an early update to the headcrab sounds where details like breathing and grunting were added for the first time, we received feedback that the new sounds were too cute and familiar, moving the headcrab too far in the direction of a cuddly creature rather than an alien threat. We updated the sounds to be more threatening, but for this headcrab we brought back some of the cuter sounds to sell the headcrab's frustration with the mannequin.
実際可愛い。ちょっと間違えちゃったんだね。可愛いね。で、下かな。
In order to reduce the amount of reloading required in the heat of battle, we wanted players to be able to upgrade the pistol by increasing its ammo capacity. That might seem like a small change, but implementing it in a way that was intuitive to players and that didn't have a lot of negative side effects was surprisingly tricky to get right. Our initial mechanic for increasing the ammo capacity was to use double-sized clips. Once the pistol was upgraded, the player's backpack held clips with twice as many bullets, and those were represented by a clip model that was twice as long. But unfortunately, the longer clips presented a lot of distracting fictional problems. For one, they looked ridiculous protruding out of the bottom of the pistol. Players were also left wondering what was going on in their backpack to transform the single capacity clips that they put in there into the double capacity versions that they were pulling out. We were also left with the sort of absurd implication that the pistol clips found in the world now magically all had to be the upgraded double-sized versions. While we did scrap the double-sized clips, the concept was still enticing. We just needed to find a better metaphor. So then we started looking at the hoppers that were used on paintball guns that can store large amounts of paintballs. In fact, the final upgrade that resulted from this whole line of thinking is still internally referred to as the bullet hopper. So with this in mind, we next needed to design an intuitive interaction model. Players were already satisfied with our existing pistol interaction loop, which was eject clip, insert the next one, chamber, and then shoot. So we wanted to preserve these skills that players were already beginning to master. So players would still reload the gun as before, but small mechanical prongs would steal bullets from the inserted clip, pull them into the hopper, and then place them into the firing chamber as needed. Audio cues were also added to clearly communicate the state of the hopper loading process. The hopper also impacted the visual design that we used to convey the state of the pistol. Originally, the clips themselves had a numerical counter indicating the number of bullets remaining. And on its own, this was fine, and players understood it easily. But the readout on the bullet hopper was on the opposite side of the pistol, and had a pattern of blue dots indicating the amount of bullets remaining. So these two representations in two different locations made it difficult for players to quickly determine the total number of bullets in the upgraded gun. To solve this, we designed a single visual readout on the side of the pistol grip. It structurally matched the state of a pistol clip, the pistol's bullet chamber, and the bullet hopper if the upgrade was acquired.
ボディカントが入ってるのか。あと1個。あと1個どっかに欲しい。あ、けど降りてきちゃったから無理だな。なんか。実はこっから降りられるんだよね、多分。今はバグった模様。
Russ, how's Dad doing? Does he seem okay?
Oh, he's fine, Alex. He's working away over there.
Good. Well, thanks.
Oh, he is missing a leg, though.
Yeah. You know, he was missing a leg before.
Right. Well, it's still gone.
Thanks, Russ.
Sure thing.
いいやつだよね、ラッセル。美味しくなかったか。プラスになったからよし。
Whoa, Alex!
Are you seeing that?
The Vortigons are taking down the substation!
Yes!
This might work.
Deploy technician teams to blocks 496477. Maintain priority.
見たことのある景色だ。 ち体力がないんじゃ。セーブしてもはい。
It's generally a requirement that all new enemy types have a section of the game designed to introduce them. We rarely build the introduction early on in the process, though, because it's often through playtesting that we learn exactly what aspects of the new enemy need to be highlighted in the introduction. In addition to understanding the capabilities of a new enemy, we also find introductions help solidify the very existence of the new enemy type in the player's mind. Without an explicit introduction, we sometimes find that playtesters confuse multiple enemy types, conflating them in their minds. This was the case with the Suppressor, the class of soldier that's designed to pin a player behind cover while other soldiers advance on them. The Suppressor is an inversion of the previous soldier classes, who've all focused on trying to push players out of cover. The Suppressor introduction stretches across the next 2 rooms. In the first, players see the Suppressor firing at zombies, giving the player a moment to safely observe its firing behavior. They also get to hear its associated sounds, which are important to learn for future encounters. In the second room, players learn to fight the Suppressor themselves. This is relatively straightforward when the Suppressor is alone, but will become more involved in later arenas where we combine the Suppressor with other soldier types.
体力で抜けられるか。
Oh. Whew. Okay.
慎重になればたやすい。とやりの。てか、グレが強いな。グレの残りがこうなってしまった。
Okay, there's no direct path from where you are to the vault, so you're going to have to snake your way there.
Well, it's huge, so it shouldn't be hard to know which way I'm going. I don't understand what they're doing with it here. If this weapon is so powerful, why keep it locked up in a dump like this?
My guess is they're trying to find a way to ship it off Earth, back to their home or some other planet.
Why not use it here?
They already won this war, Alex.
It isn't practical to spend development time or art resources evenly across every part of the game, so we rely on strategic reuse of resources to maintain fidelity and specificity across the game's environments. This space was initially constructed using industrial models and textures seen throughout many previous environments. To set it apart, we added the large cables and Vortigaunt pods to imply a makeshift combine power plant whose purpose was to transmit energy to the substations. The juxtaposition of this abandoned industrial space with the large combine cables created enough visual interest to make the space feel meaningful at a relatively low cost. The cable motif was subsequently added to other parts of the game to increase visual interest and give the player a sense of being led toward the vault. It may not be obvious, but the cables exiting through the ceiling here continue onto the exterior of the building, across the large construction courtyard, and over the roof of the distillery building, presumably continuing on to a substation or other combine infrastructure. Players may not notice that continuation, but such details help guide us in building a world that feels connected and consistent.
セージしぐらいはあると思ったんだけど。まあいいや。そっか。出たな。ビビるわ。
One problem we faced with the VR movement styles that Alex supported was keeping the combat experience from diverging based upon whether players were using teleport or continuous movement. If the combat was significantly different depending on the player's movement setting, our playtesting requirements could explode combinatorially. One way that we prevented this combinatorial explosion was by ensuring that AIs could sense player movement no matter which locomotion style the player was using. To do this, we created a visual proxy for players using teleport locomotion. Imagine a scenario where the player is behind cover, hidden from a soldier's sight. If the player used continuous movement to run to another piece of nearby cover, the soldier would see them while they were out in the open. But a player who instantly teleported from one piece of cover to the next would not be seen. To solve this discrepancy, when a player teleports, we leave a breadcrumb trail of invisible visual proxies, which the enemy AI can see. These proxies pass information to the AI similar to what it would have gathered from seeing the player perform the movement directly. In this case, the soldier would know the teleporting player had left the original cover and run across open ground to the new cover, just like a player using continuous motion. While obviously not identical, in that the soldier didn't have a chance to take a shot at the teleporting player, These kinds of features did allow us to reduce the number of ways our AI logic needed to take player movement options into consideration.
テレポート中ってやっぱり無敵なんだ。あ、どうして爆弾どこ行った？ついてないじゃん。
You've got company.
Last mag.
弾の補充をしなければ。手をつかずに撃っちゃったな。なんだかんだ拳銃が圧倒的に使いやすいからついつい頼る。まあそっちはともかくだ。あったっけ？お世辞ぐらいないの？ないらしい。 違わない？あっちがシーキレートかな。弾薬を指示しようお持ちではありませんか。ありませんね。
For Half-Life Alyx, we wanted to expand the functionality of our soundscape system, which is used to play ambient sounds. In prior games, we could generally only play one soundscape at a time. The player would be hearing either soundscape A or soundscape B, with a brief crossfade from one to the other. In this game, the soundscapes are much more flexible and can be overlapped in ways that enable more realistic transitions. For example, the volume of different soundscapes can be controlled by the player's position and the open or closed state of particular doors in the world. We frequently use this functionality in areas like this transition between indoor and outdoor spaces. If you pause outside for a moment, you'll notice the crickets, birds, distant dog barks, and other environmental sounds that help paint the picture of the quarantine zone late in the day. As you move into the indoor area, you'll notice the outdoor soundscape diminish as you move away from the door. In fact, if you close the door, the volume of the outdoor soundscape is reduced even further. And as you progress into the building, you'll begin to notice the indoor soundscape consisting of the indistinct hum of machinery and buzz of electrical fixtures.
あっちがおかしくなってるな。
Okay.
脳筋解決法ね。それないか。あ、ラピさんだ。見てる見てる。なんだろう。昨日のもそうだけど、端っこにジャンプすると死ぬ？強引な突破方法を使った結果。けど私は諦めない。気づいた。
I'd never survive a jump from this height.
No, absolutely not. Why? Were you considering it?
なるほど。これはそういう場所だった。こうしなきゃいけなかったのね。 反応に遅れたというよりも、こうコメントが表示されるわけじゃないから、デスクトップ開いていちいち確認しないといけない。これ基本的に反応できないんだよね。
Okay.
.どうにかパッと表示される方法があったらいいんだけど。受信はい。33個か。あれだね、配信を始める時の場所だ。始める時の場所。くれないか。しまった。いけないかも。あ、いけたいけた。ちょっと戻ります。おい、もったいないことした。これ壊せればいいじゃん。 もう片方も持ってったね。そして樹脂が出た。これが欲しかった。お、あるじゃん、こんなところに。グラビティグローブね、欲しいよね。でも実際にあったら太る人が増えそうだ。
We can take a shortcut through that building.
Okay, I don't see a way into this building, so I'm gonna look around. What is this place anyway?
It's a distillery. They made vodka and things like that.
Is vodka good?
Oh, God, no.
Russell doesn't like vodka. Got it.
Well, I never said that.
But it's not good?
It's poison.
But
I love it. Everyone loves it.
okay, that's all very confusing. Let me figure out how to get in, and then I'll find you some.
Wonderful if you could, actually, yes.
So 19歳なんだよね。どこを狙えばいいのかわかんないんだよな、これ。気持ち悪い。 手がこれを打ち、手を離してるときは問題ないということを知った。あんな焦る必要なかったじゃん。
Look who's back! I got the drone up and running again. Ignore that. We'll meet you outside. It looks as if there are Combine barricades up ahead. They're stopping anyone from getting any closer to the vault.
Okay, so what do you think?
Make your way into the distillery and see where it takes you. With my drone back online, we've finally got the... Oh, no! Kidding me!
あと1個足りないな。とりあえずリフレックスサイトつける。
You can put that to good use.
かっこいい。ここで実際どうやって確認すればよかったんだろう。謎だ。レーザーサイト欲しいんだけど、あと1個足りない。どっかに落ちてきていいけど、この辺りに。さすがにもうないかな。白いんじゃ。あと1個、あと1個、どっかにない？上とかにあったりしないだろうか。
For our teleport and continuous locomotion modes, we provide corresponding ladder climbing methods. By default, player using teleport locomotion can target a ladder and after a short timer, get teleported to the top or the bottom, depending on where they started. The timer was necessary to ensure that players were intentionally using the ladder. We didn't want them to unintentionally target the ladder and become disoriented when they found themselves at the other hand. Players using continuous locomotion can directly grab ladders to climb up or down. In this mode, they can grab a ladder rung and move their hand down to raise their body, or move their hand up to lower it. This allows players to move up or down the ladder rung by rung in a natural way. This mode turned out to be so popular that we added it as an option even for players using teleport locomotion. As it happens, most of the ladders in our game do not extend very far beyond the upper landing area. This made dismounting the top of a ladder challenging for players using continuous ladder climbing, since there's very little ladder to grab onto above the landing area. To solve this, we detect when the player stops holding the ladder with both hands and automatically teleport them to either the top or the bottom, based on the direction they were climbing. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of explicit ladder training in the game, so some players are surprised by this teleport behavior if they accidentally let go with both hands while climbing. Nevertheless, this was a better alternative to leaving the players hanging or forcing them to fall down if they let go with both hands, especially since some of our ladders are rather long and it would be tedious to have to reclimb just because a player happened to let go shortly before reaching the top.
あと1個どっかに落ちてないかな。 そう、左手に入ってるのはグレネードだね。虫は持ち歩く必要ないことは分かったし、回復も最低限1個あればいいかなって。あとこれが強いグレネードランチャー。
There's definitely a bunch of old bottles in here. Does alcohol go bad?
It only improves. It's all good, Alex.
Russell, you're breaking up.
The vodka is good, Alex. The vodka is good.
確かウォッカを持って帰ってきてくれっていう実績があるんだよね。なんだけどこれがウォッカでいいのかなって読めねえ。で帰るか。
Some of our earliest experiments on the project involved placing old Half-Life 2 models in a level and walking around them in VR. These included static models of enemies, like Combine soldiers or zombies. We found that players really enjoyed being able to inspect these models, because VR let them get much closer than they'd been able to in the past. Players reported getting a sense of the true size of the characters, and would often point out details that they had never noticed before, even though they had seen these models many times throughout Half-Life 2. These reactions led us to the idea of creating an enemy that took advantage of that experience, one that required players to spend long periods of time in close physical proximity to it. But enemies typically don't let the player get near them without attacking, so we felt it made fictional sense for this enemy to be blind, and to feature non-combat gameplay as its focus. Early experiments with guiding a blind creature using sounds were immediately interesting, and gave us a way to create scenarios unique to the product. Thus, the concept for Jeff, known as the blind zombie internally, was born.
これは何も書かれてはあるわ。これで揃った。あれもう一個なかったっけ。戻れ。もう戻りなさそう。前に進む。あんなところに。
The Zen flora you see on the wall here, which we refer to as Zen ears for obvious reasons, animate in reaction to the same sounds as Jeff. Early in development, we would observe situations where playtesters would fail to notice Jeff becoming enraged by a sound. If the player died as a result, they felt frustrated and wronged. We worked to make Jeff's animations and sounds communicate his level of aggression to the player as clearly as possible. But if players weren't looking at Jeff, they could still be caught unaware. Adding these Zen ear growths to the environment was a way for us to help players be more aware of Jeff's reactions to sound. The Zen ears work as an extra layer of visual feedback for Jeff's behavioral state. one that lives in the environment instead of on Jeff himself.
Alex, come in, Alex. Alex? Oh, there you are. There you are.
There's no straight shot to the vault. I'm gonna head inside and find a way out.
Right from the beginning of development, we intended to feature a variety of visually distinct Zen flora and fauna in Half-Life Alyx. But we didn't yet know how these visual elements would be used to craft interesting gameplay. Referred to internally as Zen clams, the Zen plants you would see here were originally built to add visual flavor to the world and were only lightly interactive. They would track the player's head and hands and would close tight if the player got too close. When we began working on Jeff, we wanted to find surprising new ways to use sound as a core gameplay mechanic. In particular, we wanted to make players wary of the environment around them. We realized we could use the Zen clams as a type of noise hazard by having them repeatedly snap open and shut when approached by the player. We had already placed these clams in earlier parts of the game, which meant that players would reach the distillery with an understanding of how they functioned. The introduction of Jeff changed the player's relationship with the Zen clams, as they went from being harmless but annoying to a dangerous hazard that players would need to take care to avoid.
With the blood on you. You, with the blood. Thanks.
What the hell was that?
Oh, that's Jeff.
Jeff?
Oh, don't worry. You can't see. Here's just fine, no? Got me. Oh, sorry.
Who?
All right, now let me help you out. All right, see you on the other side, Greenhorn. And keep your voice down.
Early versions of the distillery explored a variety of methods for subtlety, teaching players how Jeff works without any explicit exposition. Though some of the training techniques were quite successful, anything less than a complete understanding of Jeff's behavior resulted in players bungling their way through this section of the game and having a terrible time doing it. Eventually, we determined that explicit training was necessary, and that's where the character of Larry came in. Larry acts as a gate, delivering critical information about Jeff's behavior before allowing the player to proceed. It's a dense learning environment and a delicate balancing act, ensuring that we deliver the rules of Jeff while still making Larry an interesting character. To spread out the exposition, you'll notice that it's distributed over a few different story beats as Larry first introduces Jeff, then demonstrates Jeff's predictable reaction to a breaking bottle, and finally explains that the player can prevent their own coughing on Zen spores by covering their mouth.
Jeff, right, watch this. See, it's totally predictable. But he will rip your arms off too. Hey, those things are nasty. You gotta cover your mouth.
Got it. Thanks.
Hey, I almost forgot. What's your name?
Alex. Alex Vance.
Hey, Alex, I'm Larry. Nice to meet you. Try not to get killed. Nice helmet, by the way.
A core element of both the environment and Jeff himself are the Zen plants seen here spewing toxic gas that makes the player cough. These were not created to be merely ornamental or to support the novel VR interaction of players covering their mouth. They were added specifically to solve a long-standing challenge that we had with illustrating Jeff's personal space. One of the trickier aspects of designing Jeff was striking the right balance between perceived threat and actual threat. Many scenarios in the level forced the player into close proximity with Jeff in order to create tension. We found that these moments could be exciting, but they could also become frustrating when players accidentally got too close to Jeff and were killed unexpectedly. Players reported not understanding how close is too close. We tried a number of solutions, such as adding glowing tentacles to Jeff that acted as a visual representation of the perimeter of his personal space. Touch the tentacles, and you die. Getting the look and feel of these tentacles to a satisfactory place proved challenging, however, and we backed away from the idea. Another problem we encountered was that a subset of our players quickly became comfortable around Jeff, Once they became adept at keeping their distance from him and avoiding sources of noise. For these players, dealing with Jeff felt trivial. He simply didn't feel like a threat to them. We discussed a variety of potential solutions to these problems, even wacky concepts, such as giving Jeff the ability to teleport to sources of noise. But it was difficult to come up with ideas that didn't feel like we were giving Jeff the ability to cheat. Eventually, we came up with the idea of having the player cough. This was appealing, as it gave us a way to make the player themselves a source of noise, thus causing Jeff to pursue them. We were also interested in making the environment more dangerous generally, and so our first experiments with coughing involved littering the level with Zen plants spewing toxic gas. Initial tests showed a lot of promise. Players now felt like Jeff was a dangerous pursuer, and they must carefully observe the environment to avoid the gas. We observed that players had a natural instinct to cover their mouth with their hand to suppress their cough. This was an affordance that VR with tracked hand controllers supported very naturally, so we implemented this mechanic right away. This still left us with the problem of players being unsure of how close they could safely get to Jeff. We realized that the early experiment of adding tentacles to Jeff could be replaced with a much simpler approach of attaching a toxic cloud directly to him. There were multiple benefits to this. First, it gave players visual feedback for how far they needed to stay away from Jeff to be safe. Second, it made those times when Jeff did get close all the more tense, with players now needing to commit a hand to covering their mouth. Finally, we didn't need to teach the players anything new. They could carry forward what they had already learned about toxic gas in the environment and apply those lessons to Jeff himself.
One of our major goals in the design of Half-Life Alyx was to reach the widest possible audience. This meant developing for all of the major VR hardware in the market, as well as accommodating different sized play spaces, traversal preferences, and so on. The accessibility option that had the most knock-on effects into the design of the game, from controller bindings, to game logic, to level design, was the support of a single controller mode, for players who don't use two controllers. In this mode, reloading is performed by moving the weapon to the shoulder and pressing a button, much like arcade games which require the player to fire their weapon off-screen to reload. The flashlight was modified to attach to the primary hand, and gas masks were added so that players could muffle their coughs hands-free. Even the gun used in the final Strider battle, with its two-handed aiming and reloading controls, was modified to be operable with one hand.
ありますよ。どっかで落としてきちゃった。
As we refined Jeff's behavior in visual design, we thought a lot about how we wanted players to feel about him. The goal was to have playtesters describe Jeff with words such as menacing, threatening, and deadly, and for that reason it became important that players not survive if they got too close to Jeff, so we decided that his attack should result in instant death. This would teach players unambiguously that Jeff was too dangerous to trifle with, but it left us with the challenge of teaching this to players without necessarily killing them. The approach we took was to give the player opportunities to witness Jeff attack and kill other characters. Early versions of the level included scenarios where Jeff and the player would encounter zombies and Combine soldiers. The player could attack these enemies, or use sound to lure Jeff into place so that he could pummel them with his massive arms. This gave players an opportunity to witness Jeff's power and his method of attack without dying at his hands themselves. Unfortunately, this outcome wasn't guaranteed, as some players would opt to kill those enemies themselves, and having these other characters present was also quite expensive in terms of animation, sound, and level content. We were already grappling with the challenge of keeping this level well-paced and within scope, and so we cut these sections. But this still left us with the original problem of how to demonstrate Jeff's ability to kill without killing the player. We chose to address this by adding beats to existing animated sequences. For example, when the player opens this two-handed roller door, We added a head crab for Jeff to munch on in full view of the player. We also added a similar beat to the later elevator ride, with Jeff smashing a head crab against a wall before melting it down with acid.
90いってるな、それか。じゃあすぐすんのか。妖怪物。
Even though Larry instructs the player on the basics of how Jeff works, we found that we needed to let players test those rules without having Jeff in their immediate personal space. If we made players first interact with Jeff face to face, they often fell to pieces and forgot the rules. They would die over and over again, and their fear of Jeff would quickly turn into frustration and annoyance. This area was created to serve as a training playground, where players can observe Jeff reacting to various sounds while remaining safe from his attacks. It contains many of the elements that are encountered throughout the rest of the level, including some falling bottles, a padlock that needs to be shot, and various types of Zen plants. Jeff remains close enough to feel threatening, but he cannot attack the player. Players can spend as much time here as they need to, and move on when they feel like they've got a good grip on how Jeff works.
Jeff's character design went through several significant revisions over the course of development. Just by looking at him, we wanted players to understand certain things about the character. Our first priority was to communicate his blindness. Second, we wanted the character to feel physically imposing. After all, the entire concept of Jeff had grown out of our observation that just being close to a character in VR could make for a powerful experience. Finally, we wanted players to understand the blind zombie's behavioural state at a glance. Is he feeling angry? Did he just hear something and is feeling curious? And so on. The first design that we modelled and animated was a sort of combine worker robot. The robot's face featured a holographic display that could flip between different icons that represented its state. A large piece of rebar jutted out of the back of the robot's head, sparking electricity and spewing smoke. This was meant to demonstrate that its visual sensors were impaired, making it blind. We made the robot tall and hulking. It looked heavy, unpredictable and dangerous. However, player reactions to this robotic design showed that it had problems. Players would initially focus on the head's holographic display. Parsing the face and understanding the meaning of the icons proved too challenging for players, and even worse, this element distracted from the rebar poking through the robot's head and their understanding that it was blind. Players found the robot imposing, but we weren't getting the deeply visceral reaction of fear that was desired. A trip back to the drawing board landed us with the more organic character you see in front of you. Drawing inspiration from the idea of coal miners succumbing to the black lung, we focused on the concept of a member of the Combine's Zen cleanup crew that had succumbed to the Zen infection. This gave us the visceral reaction from players which we were looking for. A human face is still visible, but the eyes are clearly decayed, communicating blindness. The organic nature of this design allowed us to lean more heavily on audio to feed back the behavioral state, with animalistic grunts and roars that came to include more human-sounding elements over time.
なんか字幕が固定されちゃってるな。ダウンロードし直してみるか。めちゃめちゃ油断してた。 光ってなかった気のせい。ああ、ただの反射か。
Puzzles are a useful design tool, since they force players to move around the environment and also occupy their primary hand via use of the multi-tool. In this area, the player has to aim their flashlight to navigate, point their offhand to teleport, cover their mouth to prevent coughing, follow wires with the multi-tool, and potentially pull bottles with their gravity gloves. The player has to make trade-offs as they proceed, since their two hands are overcommitted by design. One-handed players are even more overwhelmed by these many tasks. This is why we littered the distillery with gas masks the player can attach to their mouth, so they won't have to use a hand to muffle their cough. This toner puzzle went through several revisions, many of which left Jeff free to roam while players worked on the puzzle. But this resulted in players having to juggle too many elements at once, and their fear of Jeff quickly turned into frustration. The solution was to keep Jeff locked up while players solved the puzzle, with his distant roars maintaining a level of tension. We were then left with the problem of how to release Jeff so the level could continue. Initial ideas involved having Jeff break out from the freezer on his own when the puzzle was complete, but this felt contrived and scripted compared to having the player free Jeff from the freezer. The toner puzzle mechanic gave us a logical solution to this problem, with the added benefit of creating a moment of high tension for the player when they realize they're going to have to open the freezer door and release Jeff in order to proceed.
あれを聞いている間、無敵状態になるから、その間に即死攻撃食らうとああなるのね。昔今日はしてなかったはずなんですけど、どうして
Toner puzzles are a useful design tool, since they force players to move around the environment and also occupy their primary hand via use of the multi-tool. In this area, the player has to aim their flashlight to navigate, point their offhand to teleport, cover their mouth to prevent coughing, follow wires with the multi-tool, and potentially pull bottles with their gravity gloves. The player has to make trade-offs as they proceed, since their two hands are overcommitted by design. One-handed players are even more overwhelmed by these many tasks. This is why we littered the distillery with gas masks the player can attach to their mouth, so they won't have to use a hand to muffle their cough. This toner puzzle went through several revisions, many of which left Jeff free to roam while players worked on the puzzle. But this resulted in players having to juggle too many elements at once, and their fear of Jeff quickly turned into frustration. The solution was to keep Jeff locked up while players solved the puzzle, with his distant roars maintaining a level of tension. We were then left with the problem of how to release Jeff so the level could continue. Initial ideas involved having Jeff break out from the freezer on his own when the puzzle was complete, but this felt contrived and scripted compared to having the player free Jeff from the freezer. The toner puzzle mechanic gave us a logical solution to this problem, with the added benefit of creating a moment of high tension for the player when they realize they're going to have to open the freezer door and release Jeff in order to proceed.
そうか。近づいてきてたのがちょうどだったのか。ガスマスクどこにある？なくない？今度は何？
Many of our ideas for Jeff involved coming up with plausible ways to force Jeff and the player to occupy an enclosed space at the same time. An elevator ride was on the table from the beginning, but we were unsure of how successful it would be in execution. There was also a concern that such a sequence could be technically expensive to pull off. Our first prototype was extremely rudimentary. Players would get into an elevator with Jeff, the ride would last around 30 seconds, and then Jeff and the player would exit. There was no complicated level scripting, no bespoke animations for Jeff, and no special audio or lighting treatment. Despite the relative lack of polish, players had a strong positive reaction to the sequence, even naming it a highlight of the game when we ran company-wide playtests. This convinced us that it was worth putting more work into the elevator ride to make it something really special. In the end, a lot of different disciplines came together to create the final sequence, which combines sound, animation, scripted lighting, and careful choreography of Jeff's movements and the player's actions.
実際ここは秀逸だと思い難しいけど。閉じ込められるあたりだ。あの時点でどこにガスマスクあったんだろう。
Most of the time, the noises that attract Jeff are created by the player, who is either actively trying to lure him to a new location, or has perhaps made a noisy mistake that could have been avoided. The key point being that the player feels some amount of responsibility for the noises being made. The goal of the upcoming hallway was to flip that idea on its head, if only for a moment. Like a misbehaving pet, this cheeky headcrab appears to surprise and infuriate the player, clumsily knocking over a series of bottles before escaping into a vent. Classic headcrab nonsense. We were surprised to find that many players wanted to check and see if the headcrab had indeed escaped. They would climb up onto the boxes and crane their head up into the vents. This prompted the idea of adding a small Easter egg to reward those players. Try it, and you'll find that the cheeky crab has indeed escaped to be annoying another day. The cost of adding these sorts of secrets needs to be weighed against the potential for players to actually discover them. In this case, our playtest observations made the cost appear worth it, in particular for the impact it would have in making the world feel more real. A full reality where living creatures go about their lives even if the player isn't there to witness them.
Alex, coming in. Hey, Alex. Oh, there you are. Can you hear me?
More or less. You're breaking up.
I think you're still in the distillery.
I made a friend named Jeff.
Oh, that's great. We can take all the help we can get.
Yeah, we're not really close.
Listen, there should be a big tunnel-sized plug in the floor there somewhere. That's gonna be...
The tunnel out of here?
Correct. You get it open, I'll figure out where it leads.
Since the entire premise of Jeff hinged on keeping Jeff and the player in close proximity to each other, the distillery map was constructed as a series of chambers connected by one-way transitions. Early on, we used two techniques in concert to keep Jeff and the player together throughout the level. First, each new area was gated with a special locked door. These took the form of impenetrable Zen membranes that only Jeff could tear through. The player would lure Jeff to the membrane using sound, and Jeff would break it open so that both Jeff and the player could proceed. We had always had a goal of having players describe Jeff in adversarial terms, as a constant pursuer or a thorn in their side. The problem with the Zen membrane concept was that it led to players describing Jeff as a useful tool, or worse, an angry co-op partner, rather than something they feared. Another way that we would keep Jeff and the player together was via the use of one-way drops. Jeff would fall off catwalks, platforms, and ladders into each new area. These drops functioned as intended, but just like the Zen membranes, elicited an undesirable reaction from players, especially when repeated multiple times. Watching Jeff do these pratfalls left players feeling like he was less dangerous. They felt sorry for him, and even laughed at him. Eventually, we realized that we could use combined force fields, which the player cannot pass through, as a way to create one-way doors. These force fields allowed Jeff to move through them, but required the player to follow via another one-way path. This allowed us to build thresholds where Jeff and the player could both move forward while eliminating the awkwardness of the Zen membranes, and avoiding the repeated falls that had previously made Jeff look so clumsy. Combined force fields also had a few other benefits. For one, they gave Jeff a convenient way to take a backstage route that is inaccessible to the player, like the one at the bottom of this ladder. They also tied in nicely with Jeff's fictional background as a former member of the Combine Zen cleanup crew.
そもそもここで私前も見つけたよね。他にどこにあるんだろう。
Nicely done.
なんだろうな、これ。あれ、チャットウィンドウが見えていない。ではしてるはずだけど。あ、そういう。ボスってこれレイヤーなのね。壊れない。壊してくれない。回復か。そこ壊してくれた。前回壊してくれたと思う。
Creating an experience with such a heavy focus on audio presented some unique design problems. The primary challenge was determining which sounds Jeff should be able to hear and making sure that players understood the rules. Half-Life Alyx contains a vast array of physics objects. However, through playtesting we found it best to use only a small set of them in the distillery. We needed to pay close attention to each object that we did include, particularly to audio design for collisions between the object and the various surface types used in the distillery. It was important that what players heard matched their expectations for how Jeff would react. In early testing, we would find individual cases where players would say things like, "I don't know why Jeff got angry," or "I would have expected that noise to attract Jeff." Over time, we identified these cases of confusion and addressed them one by one. It was vital that players always be able to identify the cause and effect of a noise that might attract Jeff. Failing this meant players were left feeling like Jeff acted randomly and they'd grow frustrated. Some experiments failed in this area. At one point, parts of the level were littered with piles of broken glass that would make noise if the player walked or teleported over them. Few players would notice the broken glass and were then surprised when Jeff attacked, so this concept was cut to avoid confusion. We had to be wary of the opposite case too, where players would expect purely aesthetic elements to present a noise hazard. For example, at one point we had placed shallow pools of water seeping in among the floor tiles. It looked really cool, but it confused some of our playtesters who thought that the sound of their footsteps splashing through these puddles would be audible to Jeff, even though we never intended that to be the case.
That's it. And there we go.
Security alert. Reminder, ground team. Mission failure will result in permanent relocation. Response code, breach. Maneuver, inoculate.
What the hell is that?
That's Jeff. Keep your voice down.
Oh, okay. Right, I don't like Jeff.
Figuring out how to end the player's journey through the distillery involved a lot of discussion about how players would ultimately end up feeling about Jeff. Observing playtests told us that most players simply wanted him dead, usually from the moment they met him, but there were some who felt kind of sorry for him and didn't necessarily want to see him killed. Our first version of the ending involved the player's actions unintentionally resulting in Jeff being attacked and dragged away by antlions. Part of the goal was to demonstrate that the antlions are even more powerful than Jeff, to amp up the tension just before players have to square off against antlions themselves. This ending left players feeling a little empty. They felt detached from Jeff's demise and wanted to be more directly involved. Dark stuff, to be sure. Plus, we weren't really servicing those players who felt sorry for Jeff and didn't necessarily want to see him killed. There were other problems too. The antlion attack felt random to many players, which reduced its impact. And because Jeff presumably died off-screen, players were left without a sense of closure. This prevented players from being able to switch gears and settle in for their encounter with the antlions. The trash compactor was a solution to these problems. It gave players the opportunity to decide Jeff's fate and be left with a sense of closure whether they decided to squash him or just leave him imprisoned. Even so, it has to be admitted that most players seem to crush Jeff with zero hesitation. Monsters.
仕方ないね。生きてたら迷惑だから。お、鍵そう。前じゃない。
Oh, what did you do to Jeff?
Yeah, I trapped Jeff in a trash compactor.
Well, I hope you came across some of the good stuff. I'll see you around.
Okay, the coast is clear. Time to get that plug open so we can get through those tunnels. That tunnel heads to the vault.
Great. Also, little heads up. I think the tunnel is full of antlions. Just in case I cut out permanently.
Antlions.
Yeah, you know, aliens with stabby legs.
Oh, yes, and very small, like ants.
No.
Like tiny little lions.
No, that's not them. These ones are pretty dangerous.
Right, well, whatever they are, they're down that tunnel.
Yep, off I go. You know, I hope you appreciate how much of a pain in the butt it is carrying this vodka around.
I do, but you do have two hands. Could you pick up a second on the way back? be on the wrong side of that.
Well, Russ, it's official. There is nothing left of your gun in this gun. This is my gun.
Alright, fair enough. You earned it. I still want those Russells back, though.
さあ、ラッセルズ量産してくんないかな。これいらないんだよね。サブマシンガンの場合、なんか次の弾を出るのに微妙なラグがあるから逆に使いにくく感じた。でこのダブルショットもいらないし、オートローダーも正直不便だったんだよね。タイミングを間違えたというか。だからとりあえず使ってなかった強化と使いたい強化は終わった。これどうしようかな。お腹すいた。終わろう今日は。エピックスもしたいし。チャプター8にも入ったしちょうどいいでしょう。これ意外といいな。見やすい。